Chapter 1. The Idea of Origin, Rome and its Monuments. Rome in the 1st century AD was not only the political center of a huge empire, but also a city that made its power and greatness visible through monuments. Temples, forums, triumphal arches, and palaces showed citizens and foreigners alike that this was the center of the known world. In Rome, architecture was never just a practical tool, but always also an instrument of politics, a visible sign of domination and the values it embodied. In this context, the idea of a building was born that would be larger and more magnificent than anything that had been seen before, the Amphitheatrum Flavium, which later became world famous under the name of the Colosseum. The idea for a huge amphitheater was not completely new. Even before that, there had been numerous amphitheaters in Rome and in the provinces, which served as venues for gladiator fights and animal hunts. But most of these structures were smaller and often made of wood. They offered space for tens of thousands of spectators, but no building could claim to represent the heart of the empire architecturally. Especially compared to cities like Capua or Pompeii, which had impressive amphitheaters, Rome seemed surprisingly modest for a long time. Although there were temporary arenas and smaller structures, there was no permanent, monumental center of the games. The decision to build a new, massive amphitheater was closely linked to the political situation after the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Emperor Nero had shaped Rome like no other, but also plunged it into chaos. His massive project, the Domus Aurea, a huge palace with artificial lakes, gardens, and luxurious buildings, was a symbol of his extravagance and self-idolatry. Nero had expropriated parts of the city area for his own purposes and thus antagonized the people. After his overthrow and suicide in 68 AD, the empire was immersed in a civil war, the so-called Four Emperors' Year. When Vespasian came to power in 69 AD after bloody battles, he was faced with the task of legitimizing his rule and regaining the trust of the people. He did not belong to the old aristocratic elite, but came from a relatively modest family. His power was based on military successes, but for lasting stability he also needed the approval of the Roman people and the Senate. Architecture was a means of gaining this approval. A monument that not only impressed people, but also gave them entertainment and participation, could become the basis of his rule. The idea of building a huge amphitheater on the site of Nero's former palace was of inestimable symbolic importance. Where Nero had sealed himself off from the city in magnificent luxury, a building was now to be built that was open to all citizens. Instead of an artificial lake, which Nero had created for his Domus Aurea, an arena was built in which the games for the masses took place. The place was thus transformed from a symbol of tyranny into a symbol of popular rule, an ingenious propaganda move. The new amphitheater was not only to be larger than all previous ones, but also a technical and architectural masterpiece. Vespasian and his successors planned a structure that could accommodate more than 50,000 spectators. Some sources even speak of up to 80,000 spectators. This would make it the largest amphitheater in the world, a structure that demonstrated not only Roman power, but also the ability to provide citizens with spectacle and entertainment on a previously unknown scale. The idea of the Colosseum's creation was therefore not a random whim, but a well-thought-out political program. It had several goals: the legitimation of the Flavian dynasty, the transformation of a tyrannical symbol into a monument to the people, the demonstration of Roman architecture, and the satisfaction of the longing for bread and circuses. The Roman citizens expected not only security and stability from their emperors, but also generous entertainment. The games were a central element of Roman culture, a social bond that connected the people with their rulers. At the same time, the construction of such a building was an expression of the Roman self-image. Rome saw itself not only as a military power, but also as a civilization that surpassed the peoples of the world in architecture, technology, and culture. The Colosseum was a manifesto of this conviction, a structure that carved Rome's superiority in stone. At this early stage of planning, the Colosseum was not yet called that. Officially, it was called Amphitheatrum Flavium, after the dynasty that built it. The name Colosseum came about later, probably because of the proximity to the huge colossal statue of Nero, which stood next to the building. But even before it was given this name, it was clear that it was to become a monument that was second to none. The idea behind the creation of the Colosseum is therefore more than the story of a building. It is the story of a political project that emerged from the ruins of a dictatorship and became the symbol of a new era. Vespasian knew how to use architecture for his purposes. He gave the people something they loved, thus transforming the memory of Nero's megalomania into the memory of a dynasty that served the people. Thus, the history of the Colosseum begins not with stones and mortar, but with an idea, the idea of making politics through architecture and creating a symbol that is still considered the most recognizable landmark of Rome today. Chapter 2: Emperor Vespasian and the beginning of construction. After the year of the four emperors in 69 AD had shaken the Roman Empire, Vespasian, an experienced military leader from the Flavian family, emerged victorious. His rise to power was not a foregone conclusion. He not only had to defeat military opponents, but also secure the approval of the Senate, the army and, above all, the people. In this context, the construction of the Amphitheatrum Flavium, later known as the Colosseum, was more than an architectural project. It was a strategic instrument for securing power. Vespasian understood early on that monumental buildings could strengthen the trust of the population, demonstrate political legitimacy, and permanently secure the memory of his dynasty. The decision to build the new amphitheater on the site of Nero's Domus Aurea was both symbolically and politically wise. Nero's huge palace had made some of Rome's districts inaccessible and was an expression of waste, isolation, and absolutist self-deification. By rededicating this site and making it accessible to the people, Vespasian transformed a symbol of tyrannical rule into a monument of public interest. The Colosseum was to be open to all citizens of Rome, a place where entertainment, power, and propaganda met directly. Construction began in 72 AD, 2 years after Vespasian's accession to the throne. Officially, he was in charge of the planning and organization, but the practical implementation was in the hands of experienced architects, engineers, and craftsmen. Archaeological findings and ancient sources indicate that the construction was precisely planned even before the first stone was laid. Not only the size of the structure played a role, but also the integration of technical innovations such as complex lift systems, underground corridors, and flexible grandstand structures. Vespasian invested enormous resources in this project. The workforce was made up of different groups: professional craftsmen, stonemasons, builders, and seasonal workers, who were available especially during the Nile flood, when their fields were uncultivated. The organization of the workforce was hierarchical, with supervisors, site managers, and engineers overseeing progress. The efficiency of this structure made it possible to proceed with construction in a relatively short time, a goal that was crucial for such a mammoth project. Vespasian deliberately chose the materials for the construction. Travertine from Tivoli was used for load-bearing columns, tuff for the internal structures, and bricks for the masonry. The limestone cladding later gave the building its characteristic shine. This choice of material was not only technical, but also symbolic. The combination of stability, durability, and aesthetic impact was intended to embody the power of Rome and the legitimacy of the Flavian dynasty. Vespasian's political intention becomes particularly clear when one considers the opening of the arena. After his death, he was no longer able to witness the completion in person. The Colosseum was inaugurated under his son Titus in 80 AD. The opening ceremonies lasted 100 days and included gladiator fights, animal hunts, and spectacular spectacles. These events served not only to entertain, but also to demonstrate the power, wealth, and organizational talent of the Flavians. Through the generosity of these games, the dynasty won sympathy among the population and consolidated its rule. With the construction of the Colosseum, Vespasian also set an example against the perception of emperors as isolated rulers. While Nero privatized his Domus Aurea, Vespasian made a monument to all citizens. This was not only a clever political decision, but also an expression of a new empire that relied on stability, pragmatism, and popular integration. Through the Colosseum, he combined entertainment, politics, and architecture in a unique way. The construction under Vespasian was also a technological statement. Underground tunnels, elevators for animals and gladiators, as well as the well-thought-out arrangement of the grandstands testify to a sophisticated planning. The Colosseum was not only to have monumental size, but also to be functional. Spectators were able to stream in and out quickly. The arena offered space for varied stagings, and the system of elevators and ramps allowed for impressive, surprising effects at the games. From a political point of view, the building had another dimension. It served as propaganda. The Flavians presented themselves as capable rulers who had overcome the chaos of the post-Nero era and led Rome to new greatness. The power of the dynasty manifested itself not only in military strength, but also in the ability to erect massive structures for the people. The Colosseum was thus more than a place of games. It was a visible sign of the new order, stability, and legitimacy of the Flavian rulers. In summary, the beginning of the construction of the Colosseum under Vespasian was much more than an architectural project. It was a political program, an instrument of legitimation, and a symbol of the connection between power, people, and culture. The planning, organization, and choice of materials reflected not only technical skill, but also a deep understanding of propaganda, symbolism, and social dynamics. Vespasian's visionary approach laid the foundation for one of the most famous buildings in the world, which still fascinates people from all over the world today. The Colosseum is thus not only the product of stone, mortar, and labor, but a monument to political intelligence, architectural innovation, and social organization. Vespasian's idea of erecting a monument to the people became the foundation of a dynasty that stabilized Rome after years of civil war and made the Flavians unforgettable for generations to come. The Colosseum in Rome, also known as the Amphitheatrum Flavium, is not only a symbol of Roman power, but also a masterpiece of ancient architecture. Even when looking at the ruins, it becomes clear that no ordinary builder was at work here. The planning, proportions, and construction techniques reveal a deep understanding of statics, material science, and functionality that was far ahead of its time. The architecture of the Colosseum combines aesthetics, practicality, and monumentality in a way that makes it one of the most impressive structures in the world. The basic shape of the Colosseum is elliptical, with a diameter of about 188 meters in length and 156 meters in width. This shape was deliberately chosen to ensure optimal visibility for all spectators. The arena itself measures about 87 by 55 meters and thus offers enough space for fights, animal hunts, and spectacular stagings. The elliptical design allows for an even distribution of forces and facilitates the organization of the flow of spectators, both when entering and leaving the arena. The building is multi-story and originally had 4 levels. Each level had a specific function and a different design. The lower ranks were reserved for the upper class, including senators, knights, and officers. Their seats were made of marble and offered the best view of the arena. The upper tiers were intended for the common people who watched from wooden or stone benches. The vertical division into several levels ensured that the number of spectators was maximized, and at the same time a clear social hierarchy was depicted, a mirror of Roman society. A characteristic feature of the facade are the arches, which formed a total of 80 entrances. These arches served not only for aesthetics, but also for functionality. They allowed spectators to enter and exit quickly and contributed to the stability of the facade. Each arch was framed by columns of different orders: Doric on the ground floor, Ionic on the second level, Corinthian on the third. This combination of classical order and practical construction shows how Roman architects combined aesthetics and practicality. The supporting structure of the Colosseum was a combination of travertine, tuff, and brick mortar. Travertine was used for load-bearing columns and pillars, while tuff and brick mortar stabilized the internal structure. This choice of material made sense for both static and economic reasons. Travertine was stable and durable, tough, light, and easy to work with. Together, this resulted in a structure that was not only massive, but also flexible enough to withstand the stresses of thousands of spectators and the activities in the arena. A particularly innovative element is the hypogeum, the underground network of corridors, elevators, and cages. This system made it possible to insert animals, gladiators, and stage sets into the arena in a spectacular way. The elevators and trapdoors were operated by simple levers and counterweights, an early example of engineering that was both functional and dramatic. The hypogeum was divided into 2 levels and allowed the organization of complex scenes that amazed the audience. The arena itself was originally covered with wooden planks and covered with sand to absorb blood and fluids. Under this layer of wood were the entrances to the hypogeum. This design was so well thought out that it ensured both the safety of the spectators and the efficiency of the processes within the arena. The sand surface could also be replaced quickly, which made it easier to play different games one after the other. In addition, the Colosseum was a reflection of social structures. The clear division of the stands according to status and rank made it clear how architecture was used to make social hierarchies visible. At the same time, the building offered all citizens the opportunity to participate in the games, which meant that it had an integrative function in everyday Roman life. The construction of the Colosseum was a formidable challenge that went far beyond what was common in the ancient world. The sheer size of the amphitheater required careful planning, precise craftsmanship, and the cooperation of thousands of people. The materials, the techniques used, and the organization of the workforce reflect not only the technical skills of the Romans, but also the social and economic structure of the empire. Logistics also played a central role. Travertine stones were transported from the quarries of Tivoli, about 20 kilometers from Rome. They were brought to the construction site on wagons or rafts and moved there by teams of workers on sleds and ramps. Tuff came from regional quarries, while brick, mortar, and bricks were produced locally. This distribution of materials required a high degree of organization, as transport, storage, and processing had to be precisely coordinated. Another aspect was the supply of the workers. They needed not only food and water, but also shelter, tools, and medical care. Archaeological finds indicate that the Romans set up a sophisticated system of supply and infrastructure for such large-scale projects. There were warehouses for tools, workshops for repairs, and areas for processing food. This infrastructure contributed significantly to the fact that construction was able to progress in the relatively short construction period of about 8 to 10 years. The Colosseum was thus not only an architectural masterpiece, but also proof of the Roman state's ability to coordinate resources, technology, and people. Vespasian's vision of creating a monument that combines power, entertainment, and propaganda was realized through the clever interplay of material, technology, and manpower. The result is a structure that has lasted for thousands of years and still captures the imagination of people around the world today. Chapter 5. The Opening Games under Titus. The completion of the Colosseum took place during the reign of Titus, the son and successor of Vespasian. After his father's death in 79 AD, Titus took over the reign of the Roman Empire and was able to complete the construction that his father had begun. The opening ceremonies were more than a simple inauguration. They were a monumental political and social event that brought the new amphitheater to the center of the Roman public and manifested the legitimacy of the Flavian dynasty. The official opening ceremonies of the Colosseum lasted 100 days, a period of time that shows how important the event was to Titus. Every single event was carefully planned and aimed to impress and entertain the people. The games combined gladiator fights, animal hunts, reenactments of historical battles, and spectacular stage productions. Thus, the Colosseum fulfilled its function as a place of entertainment, as a propaganda tool, and as a symbol of Roman power all at once. A central element of the opening ceremony were the gladiator fights. These fights already had a long tradition in Rome, but were raised to a previously unknown level in the Colosseum. Gladiators, who were often prisoners of war, slaves, or professional fighters, competed against each other in different classes. They had different weapons and fighting techniques, each corresponding to a certain type of opponent or specific arena location. The fights were not only held for entertainment, but also staged as moral and social lessons. Courage, discipline, strength, and loyalty were glorified, while weakness and cowardice were punished. In addition to the gladiator fights, the animal hunts were a central part of the celebrations. Exotic animals from all parts of the empire were brought to Rome: lions, elephants, crocodiles, and hippos. These animals were used in spectacular stagings against gladiators, other animals, or mechanical backdrops. For the audience, the agitations were not only a spectacle of violence, but also a sign of Roman dominance over nature and the distant world. By transporting and displaying exotic animals, Rome demonstrated its power and ability to control even the most distant parts of the empire. One of the most spectacular innovations of the opening ceremony was the naumachia, the reenactments of naval battles. For this purpose, the arena could be flooded, a process that required considerable technical skills. Ships were built from small rafts or replicas, and fighters fought the battles as if they were at sea. These productions combined engineering, theater, and war simulation, and offered the audience an experience that went far beyond the previous games. The naumachia showed how the Colosseum was designed as a stage for complex, multifunctional events. The audience played a central role in the design of the games. The seats in the Colosseum were distributed according to social ranks. Senators and dignitaries were given the best seats near the arena, while the common people sat in the upper ranks. This hierarchy reflected the social structures of Rome and at the same time served to maintain order during the events. Despite the strict separation, the audience's cheering, clapping, and cheering was an integral part of the production. In this way, the Colosseum combined social order, community experience, and political program. The games were not only entertainment, but also political staging. Titus used the opening to consolidate the reputation of his dynasty. Through the generous organization, the length of the celebrations, and the variety of performances, he demonstrated power, resources, and social responsibility. At the same time, he conveyed the message that the Flavians serve the citizens and that their prosperity and pleasure are at the center of their rule. The opening ceremonies were thus a prime example of how architecture and staging were used for political purposes. Another important element was the ritualization of the games. Every fight, every animal chase, and every reenactment had symbolic meaning. Fighters, animals, and stagings were placed in a framework that emphasized both the glory of the emperor and Roman values such as bravery, discipline, and justice. For the audience, this was a mixture of entertainment and moral instruction that made the Roman world order visible. The opening ceremonies under Titus set the standard for future games in the Colosseum. They defined the expectations of duration, diversity, and staging. The models of these first major events were adopted and further developed by subsequent emperors. Technical innovations such as elevators, ramps, and the hypogeum have also been refined to make the shows even more spectacular. In retrospect, it becomes clear that the opening of the Colosseum was much more than a mere inauguration of a building. It was a social, political, and cultural event that demonstrated power, provided entertainment, and anchored the Flavians in the memory of the population. Titus knew how to combine the architecture, social structures, and cultural expectations of Rome into an unforgettable spectacle. The games under Titus are thus not only a testimony to Roman engineering and organization, but also an expression of the social and political dynamics of the empire. They show how architecture, technology, and theater merged into an instrument of legitimation of power, and how the Colosseum became a symbol of Roman power, culture, and society. Chapter 6: Gladiators, Life, Education, and Fame. The gladiators were the heart of the games in the Colosseum. They were at the center of the conversation, embodied courage and bravery and were at the same time tools of political staging. Her life was marked by strict discipline, hard training, and an everyday life that fluctuated between danger, fame, and ostentation. Understanding their everyday life opens up a view of the social, cultural, and political dimensions of the Roman amphitheater. Most gladiators were originally slaves, prisoners of war, or convicted criminals. Their commitment to fight in the arena was usually not voluntary. Some, however, were recruited as volunteers, so-called auctorati, who decided to live in the gladiator school for economic or social reasons. They received wages, accommodation, and medical care. In return, they committed themselves to take part in the fighting for years. This voluntary commitment shows that the gladiator's life also offered an opportunity to gain social advancement or material advantages, despite the constant danger. The gladiators were trained in ludii, special schools under the direction of experienced instructors. These schools were often located in urban centers or near the arenas. The training was rigorous. It included physical training, the use of weapons, tactical exercises, and the learning of various fighting techniques. Each gladiator was classified by type, for example, Mamillo, who fought with helmet and sword, or Retiarius, who used nets and tridents. This specialization allowed for varied battles and increased the drama of the games. The diet and physical care of the gladiators were carefully regulated. Archaeological studies of bone finds suggest that they were given a calcium-rich diet to strengthen bones and muscles. In addition, they received medical care to treat injuries as quickly as possible. Despite the hardships of her life, her physical fitness was a decisive factor in the attractiveness of the games and in the prestige of their owners or sponsors. The fights themselves were strictly ritualized. Gladiators fought in the arena according to fixed rules, which were supervised by experienced referees. A fight was rarely an uncontrolled bloodshed. Rather, it was staged to create tension while maximizing the life of the fighters. The audience played an active role in this. It decided on the mercy or death of a defeated gladiator through gestures and shouts. The famous pollice verso, the thumb pointing downwards or upwards, symbolized this judgment and made the spectator part of the production. Fame was a central incentive for gladiators. A successful fighter could rise to a kind of celebrity, with fans, admirers, and sometimes financial security. Some gladiators gained a reputation that went far beyond the arena. Their names were immortalized in inscriptions, and they were even mentioned on coins or in literary texts. Despite their social subordination, they were heroic figures whose courage and skill were celebrated. However, life in the arena was always dangerous. Injuries, infections, and death were constant companions. A gladiator could lose everything due to a careless moment. Nevertheless, participation in the games also offered the opportunity to influence one's own fate and to gain the recognition of the emperor, the audience, and the sponsors. This tension between risk and glory was a central element of the attractiveness of gladiator fights. Gladiators were also a political instrument. Emperors and politicians used the games to demonstrate their power and control the people. The gladiators performed as part of large events that not only served as entertainment, but also carried messages about order, strength, and loyalty. They were symbols of Roman virtues and at the same time a means of binding the population and ensuring political stability. An interesting aspect was the cultural integration of the gladiators. Many came from the provinces of the empire and brought their own fighting techniques, customs, and equipment. In the Colosseum, these different traditions merged into a Roman spectacle that demonstrated the versatility and reach of the empire. Each battle was thus also a mirror of Rome's political and cultural power, a miniature image of the empire. In conclusion, it turns out that the life of the gladiators was a fascinating interplay of danger, discipline, fame, politics, and business. They were at the center of the Roman games, representing the values of the empire and at the same time being tools for entertainment and propaganda. Their training, the handling of weapons, The organization of the fights and their relationship with the audience made them more than simple fighters. They were symbols of Roman culture and power, the aftermath of which can still be felt today in literature, film, and pop culture. Understanding the gladiators is therefore a key to grasping the significance of the Colosseum. They were not only actors in the games, but also carriers of political messages, heroes of the people, and figures of cultural relevance. Through her life and work, it becomes clear how closely sports, entertainment, politics, and society were connected in Rome. The Colosseum was unthinkable without the gladiators, and their stories make it a living monument that continues to fascinate people's imaginations to this day. Chapter 7: Animal Hunts and Exotic Beasts in the Colosseum. In addition to the gladiator fights, the so-called Venations, the animal hunts, were among the most spectacular and at the same time cruelest program items of the games in the Colosseum. These events were not only a means of entertainment, but also an expression of Roman power and imperial reach. They demonstrated Rome's ability to source, transport, and bring the most exotic animals from the most remote provinces of the empire to the arena. The animals that performed in the arenas came from all parts of the Roman Empire. Lions and leopards were imported from North Africa, elephants from India or North Africa, crocodiles from the Nile, and hippos also from the African regions. Exotic birds, ostriches, and smaller predators also found their way to Rome. Transporting these animals was logistically extremely challenging. They had to be caught, tamed, fed, and brought in special cages over long distances, often over land and water. This alone shows the resources the empire provided for the entertainment of its citizens. The animal hunts themselves were staged spectacles that represented a mixture of danger, drama, and pedagogical instruction. The animals were either let loose against each other in fights or pitted against gladiators. The latter were specially trained to survive these battles, putting their skills, reflexes, and courage to the test. For the audience, this was a thrill that demonstrated the power and civilization of Rome. Humans could dominate the wild nature and bring the exotic animals under control. The Venations were not only entertainment, but also an expression of Roman domination over nature. Every animal symbolized a conquered part of the empire. Every agitation demonstrated Rome's ability to bring even the untamed under control. The audience thus experienced not only a spectacle, but a manifestation of imperial power. This form of staging made the Colosseum a place where political and cultural messages merged with entertainment. The Venations also had a social dimension. They were part of the public games that were open to all citizens of Rome. Rich and powerful visitors took their seats in the lower ranks, while the common people occupied the upper ranks. Despite this social separation, all spectators were able to experience the strength and courage of the animals and gladiators. The games created a communal experience and strengthened the sense of belonging to Roman society. The Venations were not without controversy. Historical sources tell of the cruelty that was expressed in these events. The animals were often killed, and gladiators had to risk their lives. Nevertheless, the games were considered a necessary part of Roman culture, which combined entertainment, religion, and politics. They were an expression of a worldview in which power, control, and courage were celebrated. The Venations left lasting traces in history and cultural memory. They illustrate how closely architecture, politics, entertainment, and social structures were linked in ancient Rome. Through the combination of danger, drama, and organization, they are still considered a prime example of Roman engineering and social staging. In addition to the gladiator fights and animal hunts, the so-called Naumachias, the reenactments of sea battles, were one of the most spectacular elements of the games in the Colosseum. These events showed not only the ingenuity and technical skills of the Romans, but also the political power and wealth necessary to carry out such elaborate stagings. The Naumachia combined war, theater, and engineering in a unique way, making the Colosseum a stage for extraordinary spectacles. Another aspect was the dramatic effect. The spectators were arranged around the arena from all sides and could follow every movement of the ships. The combination of water, ships, fighting techniques, and surprising mechanical effects created an experience that went far beyond the usual gladiator fights. The Naumachia were thus not only sporting performances, but also theatre and spectacles that overwhelmed the senses of the spectators. The organization of such events also required considerable amounts of manpower. Engineers, craftsmen, shipbuilders, zookeepers, gladiators, and actors had to be coordinated to make the spectacle run smoothly. The planning included everything from the construction of the boats to the flooding of the arena and safety measures for the spectators. This complex logistics shows that Roman society had amazing organizational skills that went far beyond simple construction projects. The cost of the Naumachia was also enormous. Water, animals, materials, boats, actors, and gladiators. All this required enormous financial resources. The financing of such events was an expression of Rome's prosperity and power. At the same time, they offered the emperor the opportunity to present himself as a generous ruler who offered his citizens spectacular entertainment and luxury. The Naumachia were therefore not only technical miracles, but also instruments of social and political control. Another feature was the symbolic dimension of the naval battles. They commemorated Rome's military successes, control over distant territories, and the superiority of the Roman fleet. For the spectators, the Naumachia were a visual manifestation of the empire. They showed power, organization, and the ability to control the forces of nature. The combination of reality and staging made the Naumachia a powerful means of propaganda. The Naumachia also had an aesthetic function. The design of the ships, the staging of the battles, and the mechanics of the elevators created a spectacle that went beyond mere entertainment. They combined art, engineering, and theatre into an overall experience. The spectators experienced an interplay of technology, nature, and human skill that amazed them and impressively demonstrated the size of the empire. In conclusion, the naval battles in the Colosseum were much more than mere reenactments of war. They were a symbol of the power, wealth, and technical superiority of Rome. They combined engineering, theatre, logistics, organization, and political staging in a unique way. The Naumachia made the Colosseum a multifunctional structure that not only presented gladiators and animals, but also staged historical events, power, and social structures. The naval battles demonstrated that the Colosseum was much more than a mere amphitheater. It was a stage for the fusion of war, theater, and technology, a place where power, entertainment, and social order became visible and tangible. The Naumachia thus left a lasting impression and made the Colosseum a symbol of Roman engineering and cultural staging, the fascination of which continues to this day. Chapter 9. The Audience. Who sat where? Another aspect was the socio-political function of the audience. The games were a means of entertaining the people, ensuring loyalty, and conveying political messages. Emperors and sponsors used the spectators to demonstrate their power, gain sympathy, and exercise social control. The audience was not only entertained, but also involved in the symbolic world of Roman values. Bravery, discipline, courage, and loyalty were celebrated. Weakness or cowardice were punished in staged fashion. The active role of the audience made the Colosseum a place of interaction between power and population. Spectator reactions influenced the course of the games. Their enthusiasm and criticism had an effect on gladiators and organizers. This interaction created a dynamic relationship between all participants. Rulers, gladiators, and spectators were part of a complex system that combined entertainment, politics, and social order. In conclusion, the audience of the Colosseum was much more than passive observers. The seating arrangement, participation in decisions, the physical proximity to the arena, and the social structure of the stands made every spectator an active part of the spectacle. The Colosseum was thus not only an architectural masterpiece, but also a stage on which society, politics, and power became visible and tangible. The Colosseum was much more than an arena for gladiators, animal hunts, or spectacular sea battles. It was a strategic instrument of Roman politics and propaganda that staged the power of the emperors, clarified social hierarchies, and ensured the loyalty of the population. The architecture, the games, and the organization of the audience were carefully coordinated to convey political messages and consolidate the prestige of the rulers. The games and the architecture also served to secure the loyalty of the people. In an empire that stretched across continents, the bond of citizens to the emperor was crucial. By providing food, entertainment, and spectacular events, the emperor showed that he cared for the well-being of the people. This strengthened political stability and reduced the risk of unrest. The formula bread and games was impressively implemented in the Colosseum. Food and entertainment as a means of securing power. The visual dimension also played a role. The Colosseum was the largest amphitheater in the world, an imposing structure that demonstrated the architectural superiority of Rome. The arches, columns, tiers, and elliptical shape created an impression of order, power, and permanence. The very sight of the Colosseum conveyed political messages. The Flavians were able to create monuments that were both functional and representative, that embodied the power of the emperor and glorified Roman civilization. In conclusion, the Colosseum was much more than an arena for battles and spectacles. It was an instrument of political power, a tool of propaganda, and a symbol of social order, stability, and generosity. Emperors used the games to legitimize their rule, bind the people, and demonstrate the greatness of Rome. The architecture, the organization of the spectators, the staging of the battles, and the integration of history and mythology made the Colosseum a unique place of staging power. During the active phase of their service, the gladiators lived almost exclusively in the vicinity of the arena. They lived in underground quarters or nearby ludii, the gladiator schools. Everyday life was strictly regulated. Training routines, nutrition, medical care, and rest periods were meticulously observed. Life was characterized by physical toughness, discipline, and constant preparation for the fights. Injuries were common, but medical care was available to ensure the operational readiness of the fighters. The animals used in the venations were also a constant part of everyday life. Elephants, lions, crocodiles, or hippos had to be fed, cared for, and trained every day. Keepers and bestiarii were experts in dealing with the exotic creatures. They not only had to ensure safety, but also make sure that the animals were ready for the staging in the arena. Caring for the animals was therefore a central part of the farm and required both expertise and organizational talent. Everyday life in the Colosseum also included the technical support of the building. The elevators, trapdoors, and ramps had to be maintained. The wooden surfaces of the arena had to be checked, and any damage to the stands had to be repaired. Engineers and craftsmen worked continuously to keep the structure in functional condition. This care was crucial to ensure the safety of spectators and participants, and to ensure the smooth running of the games. Another aspect of everyday life was the organization of the audience. The admission controls, seat assignments, and security precautions required a complex system of guards, and signage. The streams of spectators had to be directed in such a way that chaos was avoided and each spectator could take their designated seat. The exact division of the stands reflected the social hierarchy and made power, status, and affiliation visible. In addition to the structural and organizational processes, everyday life was also characterized by rituals and symbolism. Each event began with ceremonies, processions, and prayers designed to honor both the gods and the rulers. Gladiators swore oaths, animals were used in ritual sequence, and the staging of fights or historical reenactments followed clear rules. These rituals served not only to entertain, but also to convey values, discipline, and order. The preparation of the games was a logistical masterpiece. Materials for stage sets, weapons, armor, and scenery had to be provided. Boats for naumachia had to be maintained. Water had to be piped into the arena, and safety measures had to be checked. Every single component was part of a well-thought-out system that guaranteed the safety of the audience and the effectiveness of the staging. A particularly interesting aspect of everyday life was the interaction between participants. Gladiators, animal keepers, engineers, guards, and organizers worked in a tightly networked system. Decisions had to be made quickly, conflicts resolved, and processes coordinated. This network of people from different backgrounds and functions illustrates how complex the Colosseum's organization was. It was a city in miniature, where social roles, responsibilities, and hierarchies were clearly defined. Everyday life in the Colosseum also reflected the connection between entertainment, politics, and society. The games were not just a leisure activity, but a means of securing loyalty, transporting political messages, and conveying social values. Every action, every decision, and every staging had a meaning that went beyond the immediate entertainment value. In summary, everyday life at the Amphitheatrum Flavium went far beyond the spectacle in the arena. It included the careful preparation of the games, the organization of gladiators, animals, and technical systems, the control of the crowds of spectators, and the maintenance of the building. At the same time, it was characterized by rituals, symbolism, and social hierarchy. Every day in the Colosseum was an interplay of technology, organization, social control, and political staging, which made the building a lively center of Roman society. The understanding of everyday life in the Colosseum shows how closely architecture, technology, social structure, and politics were intertwined. The amphitheater was not only a place of violence and entertainment, but also a mirror of Rome itself. It combined power, organization, social order, and cultural staging in a single, monumental structure whose complexity and sophistication still impress today. Chapter 12: Religion and Faith in the Context of Games. The Colosseum Games were not only a spectacle of entertainment and an instrument of political propaganda, but also deeply embedded in the religious ideas and practices of ancient Rome. They combined faith, rituals, and symbolism in a way that made the amphitheater a spiritual and cultural center. The connection between religion and entertainment shows how closely Roman everyday culture, the staging of power, and faith were intertwined. Even the construction of the Colosseum was accompanied by religious symbolism. Emperor Vespasian and Titus, who had the amphitheater built and consecrated, saw themselves in the tradition of divine rule. Every stone, every arch, and every tribune was an expression of a cosmos in which the power of the emperor was understood as legitimized by the gods. The architecture itself conveyed order, stability, and permanence, values that were also central to Roman religion. The games often began with ritual ceremonies to honor the gods. Gladiators swore oaths, animals were symbolically blessed, and certain offerings were made to ensure divine protection for the participants and the audience. These rituals were deeply rooted in Roman thought. Battle, death, and sacrifice were interpreted not only as worldly events, but also as expressions of divine order. The arena thus became a place where human action and divine power met. The gladiators themselves were often seen as religious figures in this context. Their courage, discipline, and willingness to risk their lives were symbolic of Roman virtues such as bravery, loyalty, and honor. In some depictions and literary sources, gladiators are compared to mythological heroes, and their fight took on a sacred dimension. Those who survived it victoriously were not only seen as strong fighters, but sometimes also as blessed or particularly favored people. The animal hunts were also associated with religious symbolism. Certain animals were considered the embodiment of divine forces or cosmic principles. Lions symbolized power and strength, elephants the size and grandeur, and exotic birds or snakes were associated with supernatural powers. The The staging of these animals in the arena became an expression of human control over nature and divine creation, but at the same time a ritual that demonstrated the divine protection of the emperor. A central element of religious significance was the opening of the games. It was often accompanied by public ceremonies and processions. Priests performed sacrificial acts. The people were prepared for the seriousness of the event and the divine order. The staging of the games thus followed a clear ritual scheme. Battle, death, and triumph were not only worldly events, but also symbolic acts that confirmed the divine order. The mythological dimension of the productions was also significant. Fights and reenactments of historical or mythical scenes combined entertainment with religious experience. Spectators experienced not only human skill, but also the connection between myth, history, and divine order. These depictions reinforced the feeling that the arena was a sacred space where the principles of life, death, power, and justice were visible. The religious function of the Colosseum also had political implications. Emperors and sponsors used the ritual dimension to underpin their own legitimacy. By conducting games that incorporated religious acts, they signaled divine support and authority. The population recognized the power of the emperor as a God-given order in the combination of entertainment and ritual. This dual function, entertainment and divine legitimacy, made the Colosseum a unique center of Roman culture. In addition, the games had a social function in a religious context. They offered the population the opportunity to experience rituals together and symbolically participate in divine acts. Whether by observing the gladiators, participating in votes on mercy or death, or cheering along with animal hunts, the audience was involved in ritual and spiritual processes. This strengthened the sense of community, conveyed values, and strengthened social structures. The design of the amphitheater itself also had religious and symbolic significance. The elliptical shape, the hierarchical arrangement of the stands, and the orientation of the arena created a sense of cosmic order. Spectators, fighters, and animals were arranged in a clearly structured space that made both power and divine order visible. The Colosseum was thus a place where architecture, religion, and society merged. In conclusion, religion and faith played a central role in the Colosseum. The games were not only entertainment or political staging, but also an expression of Roman spirituality. Rituals, symbolic stagings, and the involvement of the audience made the arena a space in which human action and divine order were related. Chapter 13. The Colosseum as a symbol of Roman power. The monumental size of the building was itself a form of staging power. With a diameter of almost 190 meters, 4 floors, and a capacity of over 50,000 spectators, it surpassed all previous amphitheaters. These dimensions demonstrated not only technical prowess, but also the empire's ability to organize resources, manpower, and materials. Every stone, column, and arch embodied Rome's control over nature, technology, and society. The Colosseum was also an instrument of political communication. The games that took place in the arena combined entertainment, propaganda, and social integration. Gladiator fights, animal hunts, and naumachia showed the power of the emperor, the loyalty of the citizens, and the social order. The audience witnessed the ruler's generosity, his ability to organize spectacular events, and the symbolic manifestation of Roman values such as bravery, discipline, and justice. The technical innovations also served to stage power. Underground passages, elevators, ramps, and trapdoors allowed for dramatic surprises in the arena and showed the Romans' ability to control complex processes. The staging of the games conveyed not only entertainment, but also the competence of the state to establish order and control over people, animals, and machines. The Colosseum was thus a tangible sign of Roman superiority. The use of historical and mythological scenes in the games reinforced the symbolic meaning. Reenacted battles showed Rome's military superiority. Mythological scenes established a connection between emperor, gods, and cosmic order. Thus, the Colosseum became a reflection of Roman ideology, in which power, religion, and social hierarchy were united. The political dimension of the Colosseum was also manifested in the longevity and representativeness of the building. For centuries, it served as a stage for emperors, dynasties, and politicians who wanted to demonstrate their power. The symbolic effect of the Colosseum was often more important than the actual games. The building itself embodied the strength of Rome and the ability of its rulers to shape history. Wear and tear due to weather influences also played a major role. Rain, wind, and temperature fluctuations took their toll on the stone materials. Travertine, tuff, and marble suffered from erosion, cracks, and spalling. The freestanding arches and columns in particular were stressed by the combination of weight, weather, and vibrations. Over the centuries, these natural processes led to the fact that the upper floors increasingly decayed and had to collapse. Conversions and restorations from antiquity itself also left their mark. Emperors after Vespasian and Titus carried out repairs, adapted the arena to new needs, or used parts of the building for other purposes. These interventions changed the original structure, but at the same time meant that the Colosseum remained partially usable. The balance between use and preservation was a constant challenge for those responsible. Over time, fires, earthquakes, and human intervention created huge areas of debris. Especially the upper floors and parts of the facade were destroyed, so that the Colosseum no longer reaches its original height today. Archaeological research shows that the arena originally had 4 levels, while today only the lower parts are largely intact. These losses illustrate how vulnerable even monumental buildings are to natural and human influences. Despite this damage, the Colosseum remained an important point of reference in Rome. During the Middle Ages, it was used as a fortress, living space, and partly as a religious place. The ruins served as protection, as a supply of stone, and as a backdrop for ceremonies. These changes show that even when damaged, people continued to interact with the structure and adapted its function to the respective times. The damage caused by fires, earthquakes, and conversions illustrates how fragile even monumental buildings can be. They show the continuous confrontation between human activity, the forces of nature, and cultural appreciation. However, the Colosseum survived these influences remarkably, so that it is preserved to this day as one of the most important structures in the world. Chapter 15. The Colosseum in the Middle Ages, Fortress and Quarry. In the Middle Ages, the Colosseum was also used as a living and working space. In the uncertain times of the early Middle Ages, people settled in and around the arena, and houses, workshops, and small communities were built in the remaining rooms, especially in the lower areas. The arena and its structures offered shelter, access to water sources, and stable structures that could be adapted for the new use. The adaptation of the Colosseum to these needs shows how flexibly the building could be used even under changed political and social conditions. Another important aspect was its use as a quarry. Over the centuries, large quantities of travertine, marble, and brick material were removed from the Colosseum to build churches, palaces, and other buildings in Rome. This practice began in the early Middle Ages and continued through the High Middle Ages into the Renaissance. Pope Nicholas V and other builders purposefully used the Colosseum as a resource, losing numerous architectural details and surfaces. The overexploitation led to massive changes to the facade, collapses, and a partial loss of the original monumentality. Despite these conversions, the Colosseum retained a symbolic meaning. It was still a striking landmark of Rome, providing orientation and keeping alive the memory of the glorious past of the empire. Historical accounts from the Middle Ages show that travelers, pilgrims, and scholars viewed the Colosseum as a testament to Roman power and engineering. Even though the arena was no longer used for games, It remained a monument that evoked respect and admiration. In the High Middle Ages, nobles and local rulers sometimes used the Colosseum to demonstrate power. Parts of the arena were fortified, towers and living quarters were installed, and the structure served as a place of control over surrounding areas. The Colosseum thus continued to be an instrument of power, but no longer for the emperor, but for local rulers, who used its strategic location and stable structures to their advantage. The religious dimension also played a role. While some areas of the Colosseum were used as living or storage space, others were used for religious purposes. Chapels, stations of the cross, and Christian symbols were placed in the ruins, and the amphitheater was associated with Christian martyrs in legends and tales. This new meaning merged with the historical memory of the arena, where Christians had occasionally fallen victim to the games, and gave the Colosseum an additional symbolic depth. The changes in the Middle Ages led to a hybrid structure of the Colosseum. Parts remained in ruins, others were used as fortresses, living quarters, or stone springs. Nevertheless, the structure survived the centuries because its massive construction, elliptical shape, and load-bearing pillars remained stable even under load. Archaeological investigations show that despite reconstructions and overexploitation, the basic structure of the Colosseum has largely been preserved, which underlines its durability and the quality of Roman architecture. The medieval phase of the Colosseum shows how monumental buildings can continue to exist even in times of political instability, economic bottlenecks, and social upheaval. It illustrates the resilience of Roman architecture and the ability of people to adapt historical monuments to new needs without completely losing their fundamental identity. Despite damage, overexploitation, and reconstruction, the Colosseum remained a central element of Rome's cityscape, a testimony to continuity and adaptability over centuries. Chapter 16: Christian Interpretations and Legends. With the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire, the perception of the Colosseum changed fundamentally. The amphitheater, once the scene of bloody gladiator fights and animal hunts, has become increasingly charged with Christian memory and spiritual significance. The connection between violence, death, and faith led to legends that still shape the history and cultural memory of the Colosseum today. One of the central interpretations concerns the martyrs of Christianity. Many sources, including medieval chronicles and religious texts, report that Christians were sacrificed in the Colosseum. They were thrown in front of lions, tigers, or gladiators because they refused to worship Roman gods. These stories conveyed an image of the Colosseum as a place of suffering and testing of faith. Although there is no archaeological evidence of mass persecution of Christians in the arena, the legend has been consolidated in Christian tradition for centuries. The martyr legend served not only religious remembrance, but also moral and spiritual education. Pilgrims and believers looked to the Colosseum as a sacred place where courage, steadfastness, and divine grace were visible. The arena thus became a symbol of firmness of faith, willingness to sacrifice, and divine providence. In this view, the Colosseum was transformed from a place of worldly violence into a space of spiritual significance. In addition to the martyr legends, other religious interpretations developed. In the Middle Ages, chapels were set up in or near the ruins, and the Colosseum was used as a venue for processions and prayers. It was seen as a place where the divine and the human met. Death, sacrifice, and redemption were symbolically experienced here. The architecture, with its arches, columns, and underground passages, took on a new meaning that went beyond its original function as an arena. The Christian interpretation also influenced the cultural perception of the Colosseum in Europe. Writers, artists, and travelers of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance described the amphitheater as a place of holiness, suffering, and historical contemplation. This depiction contrasted strongly with the ancient use, but placed a layer of spiritual symbolism over the architectural reality and had a lasting impact on Europe's collective memory. The connection between Christianity and the culture of remembrance is interesting. The legends made the Colosseum a central point of reference for pilgrimages to Rome, with believers from all parts of Europe traveling to visit the site of the martyrs. The Colosseum thus became a place of reflection, remembrance, and religious identification. The symbolic meaning transcended the architectural and historical dimension of the building. The Christian interpretation also influenced the restoration and preservation of the Colosseum. Churches, monasteries, and popes used the moral and spiritual significance of the structure to protect or stabilize parts. The Colosseum was thus given a new function. It was no longer only a monument to Roman power, but also a place of remembrance that conveyed moral and religious values. Legends and interpretations led to a multiplication of stories about the Colosseum. They combined historical events with symbolic meaning, mixed facts and myths, and created a narrative image that focused more on spiritual and moral values than on archaeological reality. These legends shaped European literature, painting, and theatrical art, making the Colosseum a global symbol of courage, suffering, and faith. Another element of the Christian interpretation was the moralization of the audience. The idea that spectators and the Kaiserkreis had experienced the games as a touchstone for human nature led to reflections on ethics, justice, and divine order. The arena became a symbol of human responsibility, abuse of power, and the possibility of divine intervention. This moral dimension gave the Colosseum a new level of significance that went beyond architectural and historical consideration. The Christian perspective also had an impact on tourist and cultural use. Pilgrimages, works of art, and religious texts used the arena as a point of reference for spiritual experiences. The Colosseum became a place of meditation on life, death, and salvation. This transformation from secular to spiritual significance shows how flexibly monuments can be interpreted in the perception of societies. The rediscovery of the Colosseum also influenced travel and educational practices. In the 16th and 17th centuries, trips to Rome became popular for nobles, artists, and scholars. The Colosseum was one of the most important stops where visitors could experience the greatness of the ancient civilization. The observation of the ruins promoted education in architecture, engineering, and art history. In this way, the Colosseum became a place of learning that had a lasting impact on European education and science. An important aspect was also the integration into the public consciousness. Travelogues, works of art, and scientific studies spread knowledge about the Colosseum throughout Europe. The arena was no longer perceived as a ruin or a place of legend, but as an architectural and cultural monument of historical importance. This new awareness contributed significantly to the fact that more extensive restorations and protective measures were later planned. The Colosseum is not only an architectural masterpiece, but also an endless source of inspiration for artists, writers, musicians, and filmmakers. For centuries, the arena influenced European art, literature, and popular culture, shaping the idea of power, drama, and monumentality. The ruins served as a symbol of greatness and transience at the same time, combining historical reality with aesthetic fantasy. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the Colosseum found its way into photography, painting, and film art. Travelers, artists, and documentary filmmakers captured the ruins, analyzed their structure, and used them as a symbol of cultural and historical continuity. Films about Roman antiquity, such as epic historical films, staged the arena as a place of drama, power, and heroism. The Colosseum thus became known worldwide, not only as a monument, but also as a cultural icon that transports stories of man, violence, politics, and society. Popular culture picked up on this inspiration. Books, comics, video games, and movies depicted the Colosseum as a symbol of gladiators, epic battles, and historical tension. For many, the arena embodies the ancient world in its purest form: power, courage, sacrifice, and triumph merge here into an archetypal image that has gained universal significance. Historical accuracy plays a subordinate role. The symbolic effect, the drama, and the aesthetic fascination are in the foreground. The symbolic effect of the Colosseum goes beyond architecture and art. It stands for power, greatness, transience, and human ambitions. Historians, philosophers, and artists have used the arena as a metaphor for political systems, social structures, and moral issues. The Colosseum thus becomes a medium that combines historical reality, aesthetic experience, and ideological reflection. In conclusion, the Colosseum has an extraordinary impact as a source of inspiration for art and culture. It combines monumentality with aesthetics, historical reality with literary and artistic interpretation, physical structure with symbolic meaning. Artists, writers, filmmakers, and architects have taken up the fascination of the arena over the centuries, reinterpreted it, and passed it on in various media. Chapter 19: Modern Archaeology and Conservation. In the 19th century, archaeological excavations began at the Colosseum. Researchers studied the hypogea, the underground passages and cages, to understand the functioning of the elevators, ramps, and staging techniques. Remains of gladiator quarters, animal cages, and stage facilities were uncovered. These finds made it possible to reconstruct the structure of the games, the organization of the arena, and the technical innovations of the Romans. The preservation of the Colosseum is an ongoing process that involves both technical and scientific challenges. The ruins are exposed to natural influences such as rain, wind, temperature fluctuations, and earthquakes. Cracks, spalling, and erosion threaten the structure, which is why continuous restoration work is necessary. Engineers monitor the stability of the arches, pillars, and grandstands, while restorers secure or replace damaged stones. Modern research has also advanced the multidisciplinary view of the Colosseum. Archaeologists work together with historians, architects, engineers, chemists, and monument conservationists to comprehensively understand and preserve the structure. This collaboration makes it possible to preserve the physical substance as well as to explore historical, cultural, and social aspects of the arena. In addition, documentation and digitization play an important role. 3D scans, digital models, and virtual reconstructions make it possible to visualize the Colosseum in its original form. These technologies not only provide scientific insights, but also make the structure accessible to a global audience. Historians, students, and interested parties can thus virtually experience the architecture, function, and significance of the Colosseum without physically entering the building. Another focus is on raising public awareness. Guided tours, exhibitions, publications, and digital media convey the history of the Colosseum and emphasize its importance for culture, history, and engineering. This public relations work raises awareness of the protection and preservation of cultural heritage and makes it possible to experience the Colosseum not only as a ruin, but as a living monument. In conclusion, modern archaeology and preservation of the Colosseum is a dynamic process. They combine research, technology, restoration, and educational work. Research into building materials, construction techniques, use, and cultural significance allows for a comprehensive understanding of the structure. At the same time, restorations, visitor guidance, and digital documentation secure the Colosseum for future generations. The Colosseum thus remains not only a testimony to Roman engineering, but also an active research and conservation project. It shows how historical monuments can be preserved, interpreted, and integrated into cultural awareness over thousands of years. The work of modern archaeology ensures that the arena continues to be a symbol of power, culture, and innovation, and that its stories of gladiators, games, animal hunts, and Roman society remain alive. Chapter 20: The Colosseum Today, World Heritage Site and Tourist Magnet. Today, the Colosseum is more than just a historical ruin. It is a World Heritage Site, a symbol of Roman antiquity and one of the most famous structures in the world. Every year, millions of people visit the arena to experience the architectural masterpiece, the history of the gladiator games, the animal hunts and the spectacular stagings up close. The Colosseum is thus both a tourist destination and a cultural and educational center that connects the past, present, and future. The importance of the Colosseum today lies first and foremost in its architectural and technical brilliance. Despite centuries of fires, earthquakes, and overexploitation, the basic structure has been preserved. The elliptical shape, arches, columns, and tribunes show the ability of Roman engineers to create monumental structures with precise statics, material science, and functional organization. For architects, engineers, and students, the arena serves as a study object that conveys Roman architecture, organization, and planning in an exemplary way. At the same time, the Colosseum is a symbol of cultural identity. It embodies the power of Rome, the social hierarchy of ancient society, and the combination of entertainment, politics, and religion. Visitors from all over the world see the arena not only as a ruin, but as a monument to human creativity, perseverance, and organization. It becomes a place of amazement, reflection on history and society, and inspiration for art, literature, and film. The tourist infrastructure around the Colosseum has been significantly expanded in recent decades. Guided tours, information centers, exhibitions, and digital media convey the history, architecture, and social aspects of the arena. Visitors can enter the ruins, tour the Hypogeum, and immerse themselves in the world of gladiators, animal hunts, and naumachia with the help of multimedia installations. Modern technologies make it possible to virtually reconstruct the Colosseum and relive historical scenes, so that the fascination of antiquity can be experienced. A central aspect is also the pedagogical function. Schools, universities, and research institutes use the Colosseum to impart knowledge about ancient societies, architecture, technology, and history. Excursions and workshops enable interactive learning in which history can be experienced and understood. The Colosseum is therefore not only a monument, but also a place of learning where ancient and modern perspectives meet. The preservation of the Colosseum is an ongoing concern. Restorers secure cracks, fix loose stones, and stabilize the grandstands, while engineers monitor the structure to minimize damage from tourist flows, environmental pollution, or vibrations. Modern restoration techniques, digital documentation, and continuous research contribute to the fact that the structure is preserved despite millions of visitors every year. The Colosseum is also a place of international recognition. It was added to the UNESCO World Heritage List in 1980 and has since become a symbol of the protection of cultural heritage worldwide. This recognition not only emphasizes the historical and architectural significance, but also the responsibility of today's society to preserve the arena for generations to come. The arena also plays a role in modern culture and society. It serves as a backdrop for events, concerts, film productions, and symbolic actions, for example for human rights or messages of peace. In this way, the Colosseum combines historical memory with current social issues and becomes a place where past and present communicate with each other. The global perception of the Colosseum is particularly fascinating. It stands not only for Roman antiquity, but also for universal themes such as power, courage, sacrifice, triumph, and transience. The building inspires artists, writers, filmmakers, and designers worldwide. In pop culture, the Colosseum is a symbol of epic drama, historical epics, and human ambitions. This media presence increases its notoriety and contributes to Rome's international identity as a city of culture and history. Another aspect is the scientific significance. Archaeologists, historians, architects, and engineers continue to use the Colosseum as a research object. New methods such as 3D scanning, digital reconstructions, material analyses, and historical source studies enable a deeper understanding of use, organization, and architecture. This research contributes to a better understanding of the history of Roman society, gladiators, animal hunts, and naval battles. The Colosseum also combines tourism, culture, and business. As one of Italy's most visited attractions, it contributes significantly to Rome's economic life, creating jobs, promoting local businesses, and generating revenue, some of which is reinvested in restoration and research. This interaction shows how historical monuments can remain relevant in the modern world if they are integrated both culturally and economically. In conclusion, it can be said that the Colosseum is now a memorial, place of learning, cultural center, and tourist magnet at the same time. It stands as a symbol of Roman antiquity, of power, innovation, social organization, and cultural continuity. Millions of people from all over the world experience the structure, reflect on its history, are inspired, and take away lessons from its architecture, organization, and symbolism. The Colosseum is thus much more than a ruin. It is a living monument that connects the past, present, and future. It commemorates the greatness of Rome, human creativity, discipline, and organization, and shows how a building can unfold meaning, impart knowledge, and inspire people over thousands of years. The arena remains an everlasting symbol of Roman civilization and humanity's ability to create monuments that transcend time, history, and culture.